Welcome back, Eco 201 students. In the last video, we talked about writing an introduction to your final paper, which of course is part of Milestone 1. And so in this second video, what we're going to do is we're going to work on that second critical element, which is the history and overview of the company that you selected. So one thing that's important, this is true throughout the whole paper, is that you're going to want to use headings and subheadings to organize the different sections of your paper. So you can see we have the history of the company heading there. And this right here is all just the language from the template, which you can go in, and I highly advise that you do use the template as you're writing all of this paper. But in any case, what you're going to do here is you will start with the history of your firm, and then you'll just provide just a brief summary of the history. Some companies' histories are more rich and longer than others and are more interesting, frankly. And others are just, your company may be newer and there's just not a whole lot of history, which is fine. You just have to summarize it there. And then what you really want to take some time doing is making sure you provide an overview of what your firm does and what good it sells. So give the background on the company. It's really important, especially for you as the writer of this paper, to just crystallize in your mind what the most important goods and services that your company produces, because that's what you'll want to focus on your analysis on moving on. If they have one just tiny portion of their business, you don't want to be writing as much about that as as your paper goes on. So it's good. I always like to find out what generates the most revenue for a firm, and that's why you'll just want to keep your focus there. So that's a good thing to think of. And one of the most common mistakes people make is that they just type in history of whatever into Google and up pops Wikipedia, and you cannot use Wikipedia for a research paper. It is not a valid resource. It's, anybody can write anything on Wikipedia. So while a lot of it usually is true, it is not a resource you can use. But the good news here is that for this section of your paper, you really shouldn't have to go beyond what is available on your firm's website. Most of them will have all this information, especially if they're a big company. So I wanted to go ahead and show you about Expedia, which is the example we're doing here. And they have a whole about page, a list of their brands, some links to other information here. So I just want to show you that you can get a lot of really great information. And even here you can see they have a history. And some websites will be easier to read through. What Expedia has done is they've actually made a timeline where everything started. So you can go back to their early years, which is in 1996. So Expedia doesn't have a real rich history, only being around since 1996. But you'll get a feeling of, hey, here's their debut in 1996. They went public in 1999. So those are some interesting things about the early years, and then you can kind of pick through and see different firms they've acquired. And anyway, Expedia actually owns a lot of companies you're probably familiar with, and you may not have known that, like Travelocity, because you'll see all these advertised separately, but they're all under the Expedia brand. So this is a really great place to get your history. You can pick and choose what you want. 99% of your big corporations that are publicly traded will have this on their website. So you should not have to look too far for this. So that's what I recommend doing. I've actually gone ahead and typed this up in advance here because it's easier than me trying to type and talk on this video at the same time. But these are some highlights I found on their website. As I mentioned, in October of 1996, the website launched. So I have a few things about the IPO. And remember, citations, internal citations. This is not something I knew about Expedia when they did their initial public offering, right? I have to cite that, and that's it seems kind of annoying, and this is the only section where you should have an internal citation nearly every sentence because you're looking a lot of things up. Whereas as you move on into milestones 2 and 3, you're going to be finding data and research definitely, but then you need to be interpreting your own thoughts and how they relate to the microeconomic concepts we'll be covering. So you'll still definitely have internal citations, but it won't be as frequently because much of the wording should be your own analysis. However, you can't create your own history for your firm. You have to use what's given. Now, if you're doing a company you happen to know a lot about, maybe you work there or, just have a lot of knowledge about it, like people know without looking it up that Netflix, you can stream movies online. So there'll be some things about your firm, but in this case, there are a lot of citations, and you'll see that. But we're talking about when they acquired some companies. That's part of their history. Their website, I could probably have gone and looked further for some really interesting things about their history, but it really doesn't need to be too extensive. Just start to where you are now. And so then what I did do at the end here is Expedia Group continues in its rapid growth. So I had the most recent quarterly report just kind of showing where they are now to represent how far they've come from their humble beginnings. So that actually you could find, and it was linked off this main page there, but they just have some key highlights, and I found some interesting things in there that you can use. So your own company's website is really a great resource for all this. And of course, along with the internal citations, I had to add at the end, right, all these full citations. And because I was clicking around, even though it's on the same website, there are different portions of the site. So they have different citations, and I'm attributing each address where each thing came from. So like I said, it's a little bit fussy. It's not going to be like this through your whole paper because you will be doing much more of your own analysis. So then the overview, moving on, again, there is so much stuff on your website just about your company overview. For one, they may even have a section, and here Expedia's is very fancy where they highlight how many booking sites they have, how many countries they're in, how many employees they have, where they're located. Usually, it'll usually say that, but in this case, there's their corporate address below. They just said they're located in the U.S. Well, they've got their address at the bottom. Most companies will, so you can find out where they are. Just so many things about it. Their most famous brands that Expedia owns and operates are right there. And so that just is all basically you need for a really good overview. And then again, their mission statement, or they call it a modern slavery statement, which is a little strange, but that has a lot of good information for you. So taking that in to the overview, so Expedia is an online travel agency, which I already knew working for the airline that's what it's called, based in Bellevue, and then all this information I got from their site. So I have the internal citation there. I did copy their mission. I have direct quotes around that. You shouldn't use too many direct quotes, like 1 or 2 is fine, but this whole section shouldn't be just copied exactly from their website. If there's something you want to make sure is clear in their own words, like their mission, that's a good thing to quote, but otherwise it should be in your own words what you want to summarize about your company, which you think is most important, and then using the internal citation. But in this case, I do have direct quotes for that. So basically, what does this firm do? They distribute and market travel products. So that's Expedia. Here's the other thing I really like to see in this section is that Expedia Group's revenue is generated from 3 main sources. So lodging, 64% of their revenue comes from lodging. They make 11% from their advertising and media, and 10% comes from the airlines, so airfare. So that means rental cars are really small. They're not even listed as one of the big revenue drivers. So that's important to know. And it actually makes sense when you look at their brands. So I have their brands listed also here. And that's a good thing. If your firm, like Coca-Cola, sure they own Coke, but they own a lot of other brands. So you want to list some of those popular ones that people might not know are associated with Coke. In this case, what's associated with Expedia you might not have known they own hotels.com. So that's a good thing to know. And really, it's pretty simple. This just history and overview, it's almost all available on your firm's website. It should be. And so remember, no Wikipedia, nobody's blog that they wrote about your firm, the stuff they think is interesting, right? It has to be from a reliable source. And what more reliable than the actual firm that has to report things because of their publicly traded requirements. So that's a good source for here. And again, when you look at the rubric, one of the really great things about writing the history and overview section is that there's no difference between milestone 1 and the final paper and how they'll be graded, because the step up from proficient to exemplary is just that you have a firm that's a good choice, which you're already doing because you're getting approval of your firm. So if you score proficient on just the history and overview section of your milestone 1, it's going to be an exemplary on the final paper. So that is the great news. I hope this video was helpful, and if you have any questions, there's a lot of resources in the announcements. The links to things are in the discussion board, and of course I'm available via email, and I look forward to reading your milestone 1 submissions.